A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. It is good to have you with us. Got some developing news here out of Washington, D.C. We've been telling you for days about the latest doings on Capitol Hill surrounding gun control and what, if any, measures President Trump is likely to support. Well, the Daily Caller reporting today, Amber Athey, the document that the White House and Attorney General William Barr are using to push gun control on Republicans. That document consists of, and this could be, by the way, more than just this one document, but this particular document talks about ideas for new unlicensed commercial sale background checks. In other words, this is a Machin Toomey proposal here. So this would deal with requiring background checks for all advertised commercial sales. So we're not talking about full, quote-unquote, universal background checks, which apply to all transfers of firearms, including temporary transfers. But this is an expansion of the existing background check requirements, or at least it would be if it is approved by the Senate. And because this is different than H.R. 8, the universal background check bill that was already approved by the House this year, it would have to be approved by the House as well in order for the president to sign this into law. It is also important to note that this has not been officially released. We don't know whether or not the president is in fact going to pursue this, but what Amber Athey is reporting is that there have been some meetings on Capitol Hill with the Attorney General William Barr. He was present at a meeting on Tuesday, according to the Daily Caller, which included North Carolina Republican Representative Mark Meadows, Texas Senator Ted Cruz, Indiana Senator Mike Braun, who has come out and backed additional background checks, as well as Missouri Senator Josh Hawley. As Athey reports, one source familiar with the meeting said that Barr pitched the legislation by warning that a lack of action could electrify the Democratic base prior to the 2020 election. Barr, according to the Daily Caller, also did not consider the background check legislation a gun control measure. Instead, according to an unidentified source, painted it as a tool to assist law enforcement in cracking down on gun smugglers. Well, let's take care of that right away. This absolutely would be a gun control measure. Gun control advocates have been pushing expanded background checks for decades now. And this would not satisfy gun control advocates either. They would view this as a first step, as a half measure. But they want the whole enchilada. They want, quote unquote, universal background checks. They already, again, have passed that House bill. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have been trying to apply political pressure to the president, saying we will accept nothing less than universal background checks. It appears as if President Trump is cool to that idea. He's not on board with quote-unquote universal background checks, but it also appears that the White House may be floating Machin Toomey as some sort of compromise measure. And again, we don't know if this is the end-all, be-all of what the White House is actively pushing right now. We've heard reports that the president also considering quote-unquote red flag legislation, as well as a version of the quote-unquote no-fly, no-buy bill, which says anybody on a government watch list is deprived of their ability to keep and bear arms. Our friend Stephen Gutowski of the Washington Free Beacon, who joined us earlier in the week, says, according to his source, this proposal met a frosty reception on Capitol Hill yesterday, and that there are currently no plans to roll out the president's gun control proposal before at least Friday. Now, the president is traveling today. He's got, I believe, the Australian prime minister. He's got a foreign dignitary who'll be visiting the White House on Friday. So earlier in the week, it looked like Thursday was going to be perhaps the best chance for the president to come out and publicly announce what, if any, measures he was going to support. Now, again, who knows? This is very much up in the air. I have to say, if the White House really was expecting a warmer reception to the idea of Machin, Toomey expanded background check laws. I don't know who they were actually talking to, because this has been, this has been a measure that has been opposed by a majority of Republicans since 2013, when it was first brought up by Senators Machin and Toomey. And again, when you look at the reason supposedly why we're having this discussion about gun control right now, right, is these active assailant attacks. And there's no evidence that any of those attacks would have been prevented by quote unquote universal background checks, much less a half measure like Machin Toomey. So, the Attorney General Bill Barr is saying, look, we got to do something politically, or else we're going to get hammered on this in the 2020 elections. Don't just do something. Do something that actually works. And this would not. The way that this proposal would supposedly work is that at a gun store or anywhere else that there was a commercial sale of a firearm taking place, that an FFL would conduct a background check, probably get a transfer fee as well. But there would also be a new category of individuals who could be responsible for conducting these background checks, quote, licensed transfer agents. What the requirements for that would be, again, we don't know. There appears to be very little specificity about what those licensed transfer agents would do, other than they would, quote, not carry firearm inventory, but will be authorized by the ATF to initiate background checks for private sales through the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, including both verifying the buyer's identity and communicating with NICS. So, again, we had heard rumors earlier in the week that, and late last week, that maybe President Trump was considering some sort of app that private gun owners could use to access the NICS system. There were, again, concerns about privacy. There were concerns about a backdoor registry being established. According to this proposal that the Daily Caller obtained, the background check information would not stay with the ATF. They say, quote, if the transaction proceeds, the new form would be generated and sent to the seller. The FFL or transfer agent would not retain any identifying information about the buyer. Therefore, the only documentation reflecting the identity of the buyer would be the bill of sale in the custody of the seller. Now, that seller would either have to maintain that record of sale or have a FFL or transfer agent store the records voluntarily. Now, again, that's probably going to come with another additional fee, I would think. They say the record-keeping requirements will be enforced via civil penalties, so not criminal penalties. Which, again, if we're getting serious about this, then are violent criminals, are gun traffickers really going to be dissuaded by the thought of having to pay a fine if they're caught? I don't think so. The white paper says if the firearm were used in a crime, the seller would enjoy the same civil immunity as FFLs if he or she could produce the forms from his own records or from those retained by the FFL or transfer agent. So, again, that's the latest that's being reported out of Washington, D.C. And, again, we are left with the impression that there is virtually no agreement right now between Democrats and President Trump. Looks like there's not any agreement right now between 60 Republicans in the Senate and President Trump on expanding background checks. And that is, again, one of just several possibilities that exist when it comes to the president's plan. So stay tuned. It could be a topsy-turvy next couple of days here. Meanwhile, outside of Washington, D.C., we also have some Second Amendment news and information to get to. In California, the Santa Clara County Sheriff is under investigation after allegations that in order to get a concealed carry license, it helps, anyway, if you make some campaign donations to that sheriff. Sheriff Lori Smith has faced these allegations in the past. Back in 2011, there was actually a federal lawsuit that was filed alleging that campaign donors were getting special treatment when it came to the issuing of concealed carry permits. Now, California, again, is a may issue state. So it's up to the county sheriff as to whether or not they want to recognize self-defense as a valid reason to obtain a concealed carry license. That means that in some counties, like Los Angeles County, where you've got millions of residents, you have a couple of hundred individuals who are licensed to carry a concealed firearm. Meanwhile, in a jurisdiction that is got a sheriff that recognizes the right of self-defense as a valid reason to carry, let's say Fresno County, you've got thousands and thousands of concealed carry licensees. Santa Clara County is much more like Los Angeles County, San Francisco County, a population base of almost 2 million people. But according to the California Department of Justice, just 113 individuals who are licensed to carry a concealed firearm at the present. So the San Francisco Chronicle says that prosecutors in Santa Clara have served at least 3 search warrants while investigating whether or not Sheriff Lori Smith's office gave out those gun permits in exchange for campaign money. Back on August the 2nd, they say the Santa Clara County DA's office raided the sheriff's headquarters, seizing evidence through a search warrant that remained seized. A week before that, late July, prosecutors served search warrants on 2 of the sheriff's higher-ranking supervisors. The San Jose Mercury News says that they've confirmed that the investigation involves an alleged quid pro quo between donors to the 6-term sheriffs and people who have obtained concealed carry weapons permits from her office. The sources said that the probe, while publicly surfacing over the past few days, has been in the works far longer, and that it is focused on some of the sheriff's most trusted advisors in the area. So we'll see what happens with this investigation, but it does demonstrate, again, a huge glaring issue with these may issue licensing policies that allow for discretion on the part of law enforcement officers. We know that in some cases that discretion will be abused. You have individuals in New York City, part of the New York Police Department licensing unit, that have faced criminal charges for what they have done in terms of, accepting bribes in exchange for issuing those concealed carry licenses. If you have a shall issue system, now personally, again, I'm a big believer in the fact that the right to keep and the right to bear arms is a right, and you don't need a license or a permission slip from the government to exercise a right. So I'm all on board with constitutional carry, but at the very least, if you have a shall issue system, which is what we have in the state of Virginia where I live, the potential for abuse on the part of the issuing authority is dramatically reduced. If they don't have the discretion to approve your permit or deny your permit for any reason whatsoever. Gun control advocates, on the other hand, they love the discretionary issue of concealed carry licenses. They love the discretionary issue of licenses to own a firearm, as is the case in Massachusetts, for example. They love these licensing laws that allow for law-abiding individuals to be denied their rights. Gun owners, again, we've got real problems with this, and for very good reason. Now, also in California, we're seeing a mayor of a Los Angeles County city call to ban gun stores in his community. The mayor of Carson, California, Albert Robles, introduced a resolution in Carson, California, which again is in Los Angeles County, that would change the zoning laws in that city to the point that the 8 existing gun stores in that community, and Robles admits this, would have to shut down, and that no new gun stores could open up. Basically, he wants to require that all gun stores operate in a commercial district, which is probably not unreasonable. But he also wants to have a 1-mile buffer between any gun store in Carson, California, which is not a big city. Maybe, 4 miles on each side of the square, the rough square that Carson, California is. A mile buffer between any gun store and any residential area, any bar, any liquor store, any church, any recreational area, and a few other restrictions. And if you were to try to pinpoint on a map of Carson, California, where a gun store could operate under those restrictions, well, you wouldn't find any. You would not find any locations where that gun store could open, much less 8 gun stores could relocate. Unfortunately, we have seen other California municipalities and communities enact similar zoning restrictions. Alameda County passed a zoning restriction that will forbid any new gun stores from opening up. Existing stores are grandfathered in. That case was actually, or that ordinance was actually challenged, and it was appealed all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided not to hear that case, unfortunately. And since then, we have seen other communities in California be very bold in their zoning restrictions in an attempt, again, to simply block gun stores from opening or operating inside city limits. Now, elsewhere around the country, it's been a little bit of a different story. Chicago, Illinois faced a lawsuit after its ban on handguns was struck down. This was the Ezell case. And one of the things that was challenged was after Chicago said, fine, we'll let you own your handguns, but no range is going to open up. They were sued, and Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals said you can't do that. You got to, part of the Second Amendment is being able to, acquire firearms here. So Chicago changed its laws just a little bit and said, all right, fine. You can have your gun store, but it's got to be in, again, one of these locations, all of these restrictions in place. There was something like 3% of the land area in Chicago that theoretically would have been available for gun stores, but practically speaking, it was 0% of the city of Chicago that would have been available for gun stores to open. Again, they were challenged in court. They lost that case in court, but that's the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. So you actually do have a split between the circuits, meaning that any future challenge to a zoning restriction like this could see action by the U.S. Supreme Court. But again, they've already passed on one opportunity to weigh in here, and who knows if they will pass on another. We will keep you up to date as to the status of that move there in Carson, California. Let's get to today's hero of the day and our deal of the day. I have to tell you, it's kind of depressing. I could not find a good deed of the day today. So if you run across any good deeds, help me out of here. cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. You can also tweet at me on Twitter @CamEdwards. It's sad and rare that I can't find a good deed, but I couldn't. I did find an armed citizen story. We'll get to that in just a second. But before we do, let's get to our plea deal of the day. It involves this gentleman right here, Michael Spence, who has been sentenced to at least 5 years in prison in Massachusetts after a shooting at a shopping center back in 2017. As it turns out, Mr. Spence is well known to authorities there in Massachusetts. He's 26 years old, pleaded guilty last week to armed assault to murder, as well as 4 other charges that stem from a shooting at a Macy's in 2017. Yesterday, a Massachusetts judge sentenced Spence to 5 to 6 years in state prison, followed by 3 years of probation. Now, that 5 to 6 year prison sentence, he's not going to do 5 years. He's going to do less time. As long as he doesn't, murder anybody behind bars, he'll get time off for good behavior. He will be out in far less than 5 years. He actually tried to withdraw his guilty pleas yesterday, but the judge refused. Spence pleaded guilty to carrying a firearm without a license, attempted assault and battery with a firearm, second offense carrying a firearm without a license, as well as a fray. A charge of carrying a loaded firearm without a license was dropped by prosecutors. So this happened February 2017. Apparently, Spence ran into a rival gang member at a Macy's in the shoe department and opened fire. Missed. It didn't hit anybody. Nobody was injured. But state troopers and other law enforcement, took off, went to the mall. People were panicking. They were hiding behind furniture and anything that they could get to. Boston police detectives, according to wickedlocal.com, identified Spence from video surveillance footage and a GPS tracking device that Spence was wearing because of a previous conviction on gun charges, confirmed that he was at the mall around the time of the shooting. So a previous offense here for the 26-year-old gang member. Wicked Local says once he's released, Spence will be prohibited from having weapons and is required to stay away from gang members in the South Shore Plaza as part of his probation. Yeah, well, he was prohibited from having a gun before, and that didn't really stop him. So Spence could have faced felon in possession charges. In this case, could have been referred to the U.S. attorney, And if he had been convicted on being a felon in possession of a weapon, as well as the underlying violent criminal charges, he could have been facing a decade behind bars in federal prison. Instead, he's going to do less than 5 years in a state prison for actually shooting at somebody while he was a convicted felon in possession of a firearm. Yeah. And rather than get tough on violent criminals like Mr. Spence here, too many Massachusetts lawmakers intent on making life miserable for anybody who wants to exercise their Second Amendment rights in the state. He is today's deal of the day. Our armed citizen story today from Providence, Rhode Island, where an armed robbery suspect ended up getting shot by his intended victim. It happened at a home in Providence, Rhode Island. Guy was outside smoking a cigarette, and according to the victim, a gentleman named Tyrell Palmer, also 26 years of age, just like our plea deal of the day. Palmer came up to him, placed a gun to his head, and said, "Run your pockets." In other words, empty it out. Give me what you got. According to the victim and WPRI in Providence, Palmer was not satisfied with what was in the victim's pockets, ended up pushing the guy back inside his apartment. That is when a physical altercation ensued. The victim was able to reach his own gun and shoot Palmer, according to the report, which says that Palmer fled the home. The victim returned the gun to his safe. The mayor there, David Lapidin, says the robbery victim is not being charged with shooting Palmer, although the incident, he says, is still under investigation. We'll bring you any more details of that case as they become available. Keep in mind, Providence, Rhode Island, one of the many states that has actually seen Second Amendment sanctuaries put in place in communities around the state. In fact, I believe there have been at least 6 communities in the tiny state of Rhode Island that have passed and approved Second Amendment sanctuary measures. So despite the fact that it's there in New England, despite the fact that it's a tiny state, you might think there aren't a lot of gun owners in Rhode Island. There are a lot of gun owners in that state, and there are a lot of Second Amendment supporters as well. Now, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Thank you so much for being a part of the program today. Again, we are keeping a eagle eye on everything that's going on in Washington, D.C., with President Donald Trump and the push for gun control on Capitol Hill. We'll bring you any further developments, both here on Bearing Arms Cam and Company, as well as at bearingarms.com. Now, if you like Bearing Arms Cam and Company in a podcast form, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Stitcher, at townhall.com podcasts as well. And, of course, you can subscribe to Town Hall Media, and you can get your Bearing Arms Cam and Company in video form each and every day as well. Thanks so much for being a part of the program today. Have a great rest of your Hump Day Wednesday, and we'll see you back here tomorrow with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company.